Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how a group of scientists disgusted by the political interference in the UK's scientific panel, SAGE, have formed their own group to provide genuine scientific advice to the public and the government during the coronavirus emergency. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, has in the past been comprised of appropriate leaders in their fields of scientific expertise. Matched to the emergency in question, they then discuss the situation and come up with their recommendations for the government of the time in terms of scientific advice, where ministers can either act on it or ignore it, but at their political peril. But this is not how SAGE is working at the moment. It had already been reported that Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's chief political advisor, was taking part in the discussions. Not as an observer, which would have been fine, but actively taking part in the meetings, shaping the discussions. And it was his advice that ultimately became adopted. Now, if the genuine scientific experts on the panel, and if that's all there was, were providing this advice, and it was not just Cummings, there was a political appointment to it. And if they weren't able to change his mind, then basically the actual scientific advice on SAGE has never made it to the government's ears. In other words, the advice coming from SAGE was not always, if ever, the considered view of scientists who were rightfully in the group. As such, it's basically a political group that just happens to have some scientists sitting on it. And of the 23 members of the panel that we know about, which is a small minority of the total number, but the ones who have publicly come out and said that they're on this panel, of those 23 members, 16 of them are government employees. And we're told that there are about 100 experts on the panel, but although the current chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, has said that their names will be released after the controversy of Dominic Cummings packing the group out with himself and his stooges, we are still waiting. As has been said before, there isn't an issue about Cummings attending the meetings as such, as an observer. Sitting at the back, not saying anything, just observing. But he shouldn't be taking part, and he shouldn't be padding out the group with his own political appointments. So David King, who is the former chief scientific advisor, and of course has sat on a number of SAGE panels himself, said, and I quote, "Cummings is an advisor to the Prime Minister, and the chief scientific advisor is an advisor to the Prime Minister. So there are two voices in the scientific advisory group, and I think that's very dangerous because only one of the two understands the science." And for those who may not have been that familiar with SAGE until this particular crisis, this is not how the group has ever worked in the past. We're not just saying that this is how SAGE works and it's not really fit for purpose. This isn't how SAGE works. This is just how it's been working with Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson. But as I say, now a former scientific advisor, Sir David King, has decided he's had enough of this particular outrage, and he has formed a group in order to provide genuine scientific advice to the government. But of course it's going to be public, and it's going to be broadcast publicly, apparently on YouTube, according to the Sunday Times that was interviewing Sir David. And the reason being that there is no evidence that the government is basing any decisions at all on scientific advice. Not only are they not announcing the full lineups of the members of SAGE, but minutes are not being published of the meetings when they've taken place. Sometimes a few snippets are coming out sometime later after they've had time to be doctored. This isn't acceptable. We need to see the minutes straight away. The problem is this. You've got the group sitting and discussing, and you've got political appointees on that group shaping that discussion. Then the recommendation goes to the ministers. Now, the ministers, whether knowingly or not, I suspect knowingly, are then getting advice which is effectively already passed through political filters. That is not how it's supposed to work. They're supposed to get the scientific advice. Now, if they choose to ignore it, or they choose to miss certain parts out of the recommendations, then they pay the political price. The reason why they're doing it this way is if there's any comeback later on, and there'll be plenty of comeback later on, they get to say, well, we were just acting on what Sage said. So they think at least that they're absolving themselves of any blame, which is not helpful. So Sage basically now exists only to prevent the government taking any blame when later on it becomes, beyond any debate that certain steps taken were incorrect. They'll just say, well, sorry, we just followed the scientists. And personally, I would also add in that it hasn't exactly helped that the government has claimed that their scientific advice runs completely counter to the public scientific advice issued internationally. So the new group will broadcast discussions live involving global experts and will formally submit recommendations to the government. And again, all of this will be in the public eye. So if nothing else, we will be able to compare directly a clearly independent group that is having its discussions publicly. There's no behind closed doors about this group, and the advice that's coming through Sage. And then people will be able to ask, why on earth is Sage advising different things then? Now, I do have to say at this point, what you're probably thinking is, oh, what's the name of this YouTube channel, Phil? At the moment, the point at which I'm recording this, I actually don't know. Despite searching every report, ultimately the report was initially in the Sunday Times. It has been reported and re-reported in lots of other media. In none of them does it actually provide the name of the channel or a link to it or anything like that. I have followed Sir David's Twitter account, and I've also asked the question, what is it? But I'm quite sure that when it takes place later today, the first broadcast, he will be tweeting out a link to it at least after the event. I may or may not be able to see it live unless someone links it. I can find it. If someone finds it, great, post it below. But for future ones, I will at least be able to look in live. But that was quite bizarre. I've not actually been able to find it. That was a little bit worrying. But I have tweeted him. And as I say, even if because he's tweeted a copy of this article that's advertising it, I'm pretty sure that after the event, he'll also tweet a link to it, and I'll be watching it then and report back in due course. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details, and until next time, I'll see you later.